Hello and hopefully welcome back. I'm Scarlett,
And I'm Echo.
and we're going to have some unforgettable conversations, hopefully. So, before I tell you what the topic is, Echo, I want to tell you a story. I
Okay.
this week called my mom and I was talking to her because I've been sick, and my mom told me that my 16-year-old sister found our podcast. So
Uh-oh.
then, yeah. So then I called my sister and I'm like, which ones have you listened to? Because I'm like, oh, great. Like, I might need to explain some stories that we've told. And she goes, oh, I just listened to the one about all the ghost legends. So I was like, okay. And I said, did you like it? And I said, because there's other podcasts I think you'd be more interested in than ours. Because I knew she listened to
Yeah.
true crime stuff because she got my
Yeah.
mom into the true crime stuff. And I was like, I can tell you other ones that you would like probably more. And she's all like, no, I was enjoying the one you guys did. She goes, I didn't know that you could hear voices on Coffin Road. And then she proceeds to tell me that her and her friend drove out there in her car. Yeah, I see the look on your face. And what they had heard was that you stop your car and turn it off and turn off all the lights, and then something would happen. And I guess they proceeded to
Okay.
do this. And
Okay.
her light on her radio wouldn't go out. When it finally went out, I guess her friend, which I'm not naming names, saw something move. So I guess my sister quickly turned on the car and they got out of there.
Oh. So did she do this before or after
I think it
listening to our episode?
I think it was before, so I don't feel as bad.
Okay, for sure.
We're gonna go with before.
Otherwise, yeah. Otherwise,
Otherwise,
I feel really bad for tempting your sister to go do something potentially dangerous.
I know. I'm like, what were you thinking? I mean, I get it because me and you've done some crazy stuff and we contemplated going to some crazy places. But
Yeah.
like, I was like, sis, you can't follow in my footsteps. There's only got to be one really weird one in the family, and I've already got that on lockdown.
Yeah, for sure. Every family only gets one black sheep.
Well, except for yours,
That's true.
because you guys were blessed with both you and Sarah, but you know,
Yeah.
your family's a little bit different because you guys didn't necessarily all grow up together. So
We're a little different. We're my mother's three only children.
so anyway, I guess we'll get in to the two stories that I had. There's a ton of notes, so hopefully this time we reach an hour.
For
I like
sure. I'm thinking my next episode will probably go a little longer than my first.
that is perfectly fine. I
All
got done
right.
editing your episode and I was like, oh, there's only 35 minutes. Well, I hope
Okay.
people aren't upset, which my sister I don't think was upset because she seemed into it.
That's good. I'm so glad.
I'm not too surprised. My mom actually found our podcast through TikTok
Uh-oh.
because my mom found me on TikTok and then she found the post about the podcast. So
Yeah.
there's that.
I guess we should have expected it to happen soon.
So I went a little bit different than we have been doing today.
All
Like,
right.
these are both true stories. And both stories have to do with twins, two different sets of twin girls.
All right.
So, have you heard about the Pollock twins?
I don't think the Pollock twins.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe.
So, with the Pollock twins, this story actually starts before the twins were born. In May 1957, in the town of Hexham, England, so we're
All
going
right.
overseas for once, 11-year-old Joanna Pollock and her 6-year-old sister, Jacqueline, were on their way to church. They were with their friend Anthony, who was 9, and the group was hit by an erratic driver.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Poor
so we're starting
baby.
off really sad with this one.
Yeah.
Almost instantly, the two sisters were killed, and then Anthony passed away on his way to the hospital. Later, it was discovered that the driver of the car was a local woman who was under the influence of a number of drugs. It doesn't say how many or which ones.
Yeah.
And she had intentionally hit the group of children after being forcibly separated from her own children.
That's just rude.
I know, that's very
I
sad.
mean, like, I understand that people grieve in different ways, but this is the one time that her way of grieving is the wrong way to grieve.
Well, and we get to hear two different ways of grieving in this story because we have this very sad beginning, and then we're
Yeah.
going to hear what the father's response to all of this is.
Okay.
So this woman was taken to a psychiatric hospital where she stayed. And that's about all I could find on that part of the story.
Okay.
So, of course, the parents, John and Florence Pollock, were devastated.
As any parent would be.
Exactly. But when Florence became pregnant, John became overly convinced the two girls would be reborn into the family as a set of twins.
Aww.
So, this, of course, caused some problems in the marriage.
Yeah.
Because they were devout Catholics and often
Yeah.
argued over the idea of reincarnation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Florence strongly rejected John's beliefs. Later, it was reported that Florence actually almost filed for divorce because John's strong belief that the girls were going to be reincarnated. So
it's really such a shame that like a religious belief would separate a couple who presumably married each other because they loved each other.
Exactly. And I think maybe it would also not just a religious belief though. I almost wonder if it upset her because she was grieving in one way and he was grieving in a different way.
Yeah. Like she was accepting the loss of her first two girls and didn't want to maybe be reminded of them when looking at her new twins, perhaps.
Yeah, and they actually have 4 older sons. So they have 4 sons that were older than these 2 girls. You really don't hear about that when you're reading about it until the very end, but since you said that, I thought I would bring that up. So there's no history of twins in the family on either side, and the doctor actually told them a couple of times that there for sure was only one baby. However, against all the odds, when Florence gave birth on October 4th, 1958, she gave birth to a set of twin girls.
Okay.
They were named Glenna and Jennifer.
Beautiful names.
So Jennifer actually had a couple weird birthmarks that Glenna did not, which is extremely rare and unusual for identical twins.
Speaking of that, though, that used to be in our class. One of them had birthmarks and the other did not.
Yes, I know.
And they were pretty darn identical to me.
Oh, they were identical, but I'm just saying apparently to have different birthmarks and to have multiple different birthmarks on a set of identical twins that the other doesn't is apparently rare.
Yeah, because I mean, identical twins come from a single egg that's split into 2 zygotes.
Exactly. So Jennifer had a small birthmark on her hip, which mimicked the exact spot that Jacqueline, her sister who had passed away, had on her hip.
Oh my goodness.
And she also had a birthmark on her forehead, which was similar to a small scar that Jacqueline had in the same exact spot.
That is bizarre.
I know, right? And I reread that twice because I wanted to make sure that that's what they were referring to, because maybe in another episode we'll talk about this theory, but there's this theory out there in the world that you have a birthmark in the exact spot of the way that you died in a previous life.
Okay.
Have you not heard that one?
I think I might have, but I forgot about it, obviously. But if that's the case, I clearly got stabbed through the head somehow.
But yeah, I wanted to reread that and make sure that was the case. So she had 2 birthmarks. One that Jacqueline had on her hip, and then one that mimicked the scar that Jacqueline had on her forehead.
Okay.
So when the twins were 3 months old, the family relocated to Whitland Bay, which is east of Hexham.
Okay.
And I think I'm saying all of this right. So as the girls got older, it became clear that even though they didn't grow up in Hexham, they remembered it in crazy details, almost as if they grew up there.
Yeah.
So when the family returned when the girls were 4, they started pointing out and naming landmarks that they had never seen before in their life.
Very interesting.
Right? Such as the school that Joanna and Jacqueline had attended and the playground that their deceased sisters had loved to play on.
Oh my goodness.
Even creepier still, they knew the exact way to get to the playground without have ever been to the playground.
Wow. That's all I have to say about that. That's very strange. And it does remind me of another story, but this is your show today.
You can maybe tell it as a palate cleanser between the two different stories.
Okay, sounds good.
Likewise, the twins were able to identify their late sister's toys by the names that their deceased sisters had given them.
Are you kidding me?
No, I am not. So to top it all off, these toys, Florence had stored them out of sight, and the twins started asking for certain ones back in a way that made it seem as if those were the girls' toys, that they
Oh,
had owned
wow.
those toys this whole entire time.
Okay.
So again, they were able to name these toys by previously given names, and they divided the toys in the exact same way their sisters had before them.
Oh my goodness.
They were also able to point out which one of these toys that Santa had brought, and they were right.
Oh my gosh, that is so crazy.
Right?
Yeah, this is a very interesting story.
The parents also noticed that the girls had very similar personalities to their late sisters.
Oh my goodness.
So they also enjoyed playing the same games and eating the same foods.
Oh wow. I know I'm saying that a lot this episode, but I literally don't know what else to say. This is so bonkers.
I can tell you haven't heard this story before, and I'm really excited to be able to be the one that tells you this.
Yeah.
Because I had actually heard this story from a YouTube video, and I can't remember who made it. And I was like, I have to find more information. So that's what I did. So in their first few years of life, Florence still rejected John's suggestion that the girls had been reincarnated into the twins.
Yeah.
But then she found the girls talking about the car accident, and that quickly changed her mind.
Oof.
On one occasion, you might want to get your heart ready for this one. On one occasion, she found them playing a game where they recreated their sister's accidents, in which Glenna cradled Jennifer's head, telling her, "There's blood coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you."
Ugh.
Yeah, I know. That's why I told you to get ready.
That's such a weird game.
I know.
Like, why would they want to like reenact that? Even like if they were legitimately their older sisters reincarnated, like why would they want to like pretend to relive that?
I know, exactly. That's really weird. But then there was also another occasion that Florence got where Glenna pointed to the birthmark that's on Jennifer's forehead and told her, "That's the mark Jacqueline got when she fell on a bucket."
Oh my gosh.
Which is apparently how Jacqueline got the scar on her forehead.
Okay.
So the twins also appeared to have a fear of cars in their younger years, and they would have a reoccurring nightmare about being hit by a car.
Ugh. Again, that makes sense if this whole reincarnation thing is true. But like, ugh.
I know, it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is a lot.
So they would regularly become frightened and anxious while near any cars, especially if the car was turned on. On one instance, they heard a car turn on down the alleyway, and they grabbed onto each other and said, "The car is coming to get us."
Oh,
I know.
those poor babies.
I know. So shortly after both of them had turned 5, however, the memories of their so-called past lives, or the memories that they had supposedly gotten from their sisters, they started to fade away, and they went on living normal lives. So while the case of the Pollock twins has long been cited as like actual proof that reincarnation happens, many people have argued that the twins' memories could have been influenced by the 4 older brothers that they had. And while the parents claimed they didn't speak about the girls' deceased sisters until they were old enough to understand, that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't learn any of the stories from their brother.
True.
Their brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely very possible. But again, that is something that reminds me again of that one story that I mentioned kind of towards the beginning of your story.
Mm-hmm.
Is it time for me to tell it now?
Yes, you may tell it now.
Okay. So I can't remember where I saw this story, but it was a mom posting about something weird that her young son was doing. Like, I think he was probably like just starting to talk, like in the 1.5 to 2 year range. And he was obsessed with the Titanic. Okay. And she had no idea why he was obsessed with the Titanic. And on several occasions, she would show him like a picture of like a different big steamer ship similar to the Titanic. But whenever she would show him those ships, he would say, "No, mommy, not Titanic." And then she showed him a picture of the actual Titanic. He goes, "Yeah, that's the Titanic." And he even pointed to like a window like in the boat and said, "That's where I stayed." And saying like a lot of different stuff about the Titanic that she didn't necessarily know about, but she decided to research it.
Yeah.
And you go ahead.
Now, in this story, because I believe I've heard this one,
Mm-hmm.
as he gets older, does he seem to forget about it as well?
Yeah, he
Yeah,
he starts forgetting about it as well.
because in
Like
a
as soon as he's like 3 or 4, he starts forgetting all about the Titanic.
that's a very creepy thing. Like, because your story that you're telling is not the only story like I've read like this one on the
Yeah.
internet. It's a very creepy thing that really young children sometimes do is start telling these really detailed stories that
Mm-hmm.
are not appropriate for children,
Oh
and
yeah.
they would have no way to have, parents say, "Oh, they've never seen anything like that."
Yeah, they've never watched the Titanic. He's never watched any shows about the Titanic. And yet somehow Titanic is one of his first words.
Yeah, it's very interesting for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to cut off your story. You can keep
Oh,
going
you're
now.
fine. That's pretty much all it was.
Yeah, I just
Basically, he's just saying all these things, and he's obsessed with the Titanic, and he's talking about like the other people that died with him on the Titanic. He goes, "I died in the Titanic," and
yeah, that's always a creepy one.
yeah,
Maybe if I can find enough like stories about it
uh huh,
online and get approval if they're from Reddit, because we actually
yeah,
have to ask for approval.
yeah,
Which I don't mind. I don't mind.
yeah, for sure.
Um, we
It's
might do
only fair to credit. Yeah, it's only fair to credit
exactly.
the people who put out the original content.
We might do a whole episode on that as long as, I can get the approval and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Also, before this podcast ends, I'm hopefully going to have a site where if you would like to share a story, whether it be paranormal or about a cryptid or about anything really that you think would fit our podcast, I'm going to hopefully have an email for you before the end of the podcast where you can send that stuff.
Ooh,
Ooh.
cannot wait for listener tales.
Oh, I can't either. That's actually listening to some of my favorite podcasts. When they get
Mhm.
listener tells, that's honestly some of my favorite episodes. The next set of twins, because I thought, you know what? One twin story isn't enough. We need two. We're going to June and Jennifer Gibbons.
Okay, I have not heard about these guys either.
Okay, well, you might also know them as the Silent Twins.
Oh, okay, yes. Yes, I have heard about them then. All right, I'm ready.
I was like, I'm 90% sure.
Yeah. I can't remember if Morbid did an episode on them or if it was another podcast. If maybe it was Cult Leader with Spencer Henry that did an episode on them.
You know what? I can't remember if Morbid had done an episode on them not either. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I would remember it if they did, so I almost want to say they didn't.
Yeah.
But
Maybe I'm thinking of the Papine sisters with
maybe
Morbid and maybe the Silent Twins with Cult Leader with Spencer Henry.
I don't know. We listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yes, we do.
Hard to keep them all straight. And now I'm adding even more podcasts to the ones I've listened to, which I might tell you about later.
All right.
Okay, so Jennifer and June Gibbons were also known as the Silent Twin because they would pretty much show only talk to each other. So the girls were born in a military hospital in Yemen in April 1963. I didn't find an exact day in April, but it was April 1963. So their births were in no way unusual, nor were their disposition as infants. It wasn't until the girls got to speaking age that their parents noticed that the twins were different from other children their age.
Okay.
They were far behind in language skills and they were unusually inseparable. Now, twins usually stick together pretty well, but they were overly attached to each other, essentially.
Okay.
So, for background on the family, they were originally from Barbados, but they
Okay.
immigrated to England in the early 1960s. And the family did speak English at home. However, young Jennifer and June began to speak their own private language that seemed to be a sped up version of, I hope I say this right, Bajan Creole,
Okay.
I think.
Presumably common in Barbados, where they were born.
I'm not sure. So their unwillingness to communicate with anybody except each other would be the reason that they were referred to as the Silent Twins.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not uncommon either for twins to have their own little made up language. I've seen that a lot where like they have their own little twin language, but I mean, I've never seen anybody personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've worked with kids in daycare, obviously. I don't think their own special language.
Yeah. So the girls, their language wasn't the only thing that kept them extremely isolated. They were actually a target of relentless bullying in school. So that just made them depend on each other even more.
Yeah.
So the school started releasing the girls early in hopes that they could sneak out and avoid the other children.
Aw.
I know.
That's actually really nice of the school system.
That's what I thought. I was like, that is extremely tolerant of a school system to do.
Mhm.
I personally, if that's what the school system can come up with, I think it's better to let the kids go early and by themselves than to be escorted in and out, because I feel
Yeah.
like being escorted would potentially lead to more harassment or bullying from other children.
Yeah, it could definitely attract more attention.
That's what I thought. So
Um,
I kind of agree with the school on taking that step. So by the time the girls were teenagers, their language they had made up became unintelligible to anyone else. And at
okay.
that point, they refused to communicate with virtually any outsiders. So just mainly family is the only ones they could communicate with. And they
Yeah.
even refused to read or write in school.
Oh, wow. That's a little bit intense, but I don't know. I don't know what to say about that.
They also had started mirroring, like the mirror exercise. They would
Yeah.
mirror each other's actions. Years later, June would summarize the dynamic with her sister as such: one day she'd wake up and be me, and one day I would wake up and be her. And we used to say to each other, "Give me back myself. If you give me back myself, I'll give you back yourself."
That's an interesting little game.
For sure. So in 1984, a medic named John Rees noticed the girls' strange behavior while he was administering a yearly school sanctioned health check. According to him, they were unusually non reactive to being vaccinated,
Okay.
and he described their behavior such as doll like.
Hmm.
So when he reported this to the headmaster brushed him off, saying that the girls weren't especially troubled. I'm not even drinking this podcast and I can't talk right. So Reeds then notified a child psychologist who immediately insisted the girls be enrolled in therapy.
Okay.
So, despite this, and after seeing multiple therapists, psychologists, they remained a mystery and continued to refuse to speak to literally anyone else. So then, in February 1977, a speech therapist met with the girls. They wouldn't talk to her, however, but
Yeah.
they did consent to having their dialogue between each other recorded if left alone in the room.
Okay.
Now, the lady that was the speech therapist, she had sensed that June wished to speak, but was being compelled not to do so by Jennifer. She later stated that Jennifer sat there with an expressionless gaze, but I felt her power. The thought entered my mind that June was possessed by her twin sister.
Hmm.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Interesting for that to come from a professional.
Yeah.
professionals tend not to use like the word possessed or controlled. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Controlled by things that aren't like physical or,
Yeah, not
things like that.
scientifically proven
Yeah.
things.
So this led to the decision to separate the twins and send them to different boarding schools. Now, how do you think this went?
It probably did not go over very well with those twins.
No, it didn't. It did not go well at all. So, in hopes that on their own they would develop a sense of self and would break out of their shells and communicate with others, they didn't do so. So, immediately it became clear that this whole experiment of splitting them up and sending them to different schools was a failure. So, instantly, instead of branching out, June and Jennifer withdrew entirely into themselves and became pretty much so catatonic.
Oof.
At one instance, it actually took 2 people to get June out of bed, after which she was propped up against a wall, and they said her body was stiff and heavy like a corpse. So
I bet that was traumatic for the boarding school employees.
Oh, I'm willing to bet so. It didn't say how long they had been there, but I'm guessing maybe a few weeks to a month because
Yeah.
they wouldn't have let that go on very long.
Yeah, probably not, because that's a little bit of an extreme reaction, and I don't think necessarily that boarding schools are equipped to deal with that kind of thing.
Nope. So upon being reunited, the twins became even more dependent on each other. So this had the exact opposite effect that they ever wanted it to have.
Mm-hmm.
They became even more dependent on each other. They withdrew even more from the rest of the world, and they would no longer speak to their parents.
Well, yeah, they're the ones that allowed them to be separated.
Yeah. So I thought, well, maybe it's just how they felt. But then I was like, it could just be extreme anger on top of everything else.
Yeah.
The only way that they would actually communicate with their parents was by writing letters at this point. So they would retreat to their bedrooms, spending their time playing with dolls and creating elaborate fantasies. And they would sometimes record this and they would share it with their younger sister, Rose, who by this time was the only recipient of communication in their family.
I bet that made Rose feel very special.
It probably did. So for Christmas, the twins were gifted a pair of diaries in which they began to write their plays and fantasies down and developed a passion for creative writing.
Wonderful.
Well, you would think so, but we're going to get into that. So at 16, they took a mail order writing course and they began to pull together the small amount of funds that they did have to publish their stories via some kind of self-publishing press. So while the 2 young women who shut themselves out from the rest of the world and retreated into each other to focus on writing would sound like the perfect situation to create the next great novel, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't be the case in their instance.
Such a shame.
The themes of their self-published novel were strange and worrisome and kind of gruesome. So
very interesting, though.
Most of their stories took place in the US and centered around young, attractive people who would commit gruesome crimes.
I mean, that sounds like something I would read, but
yeah,
probably definitely not something that the general population would want to read.
So I'm going to tell you about one of their novels in a second.
Okay.
For those of you who don't know, Echo is a writer. Echo went to college for creative writing. I'm going to brag on her for a little bit.
I did.
I might try to get her to actually read this novel that I'm getting ready to tell you guys about. And we might do a bonus episode on this.
Ooh, book analysis.
Ooh, yeah, we're going to put you to work. Because I want to see what you think of it.
Okay.
So I'll take care of getting you the details on how to get the book after we're done with the podcast. But
sounds good.
Our hope is to hopefully get Echo's analysis on it. While only one novel titled The Pepsi Cola Addict, about a young teenager seduced by his high school teacher, made it all the way to print, that didn't stop June and Jennifer from penning a dozen other tales.
Okay.
Your face tells it all. You agreed to read this book, and I didn't even tell you what it was about yet.
I did. I did agree to read this book. I did.
So
Oh,
after the
God.
printing of their book, they became bored with simply writing about life outside of their bedroom walls and longed to experience the world firsthand.
Okay.
However, you'd think that would make them want to reach out and talk to other people and stuff like that. Well, it didn't.
Yeah.
By 18, the girls had started experimenting with drugs and alcohol and began to commit petty crimes.
Goodness gracious, girls. Get it together.
By 1981, they were arrested for arson
Okay.
and soon after were placed in a maximum security hospital for the criminally insane.
Which makes sense whenever you go around and start setting things on fire.
Being hospitalized at Broadmoor Hospital did not prove easy for June and Jennifer. This was a high security mental hospital facility, which
Yeah.
was not easygoing about the girls' lifestyle and certainly was not as easygoing as their parents or their schools.
Yeah. Because, I mean, they are equipped to dealing with, catatonic states, and they're a mental hospital. I mean, they're presumably medical professionals, so they wouldn't be as freaked out by the girls, shutting themselves down like they did in boarding school.
So instead of letting the girls retreat into their own world, the doctors began treating the twins with high doses of antipsychotic medicine, which caused blurry
Okay.
vision for Jennifer.
Mm.
The girls lived at the hospital, and their only relief was to fill page after page and diary after diary. So they were still able to write while in there.
Good.
Once, June wrote that her sister was driving her insane and that she feared the hold that she had on her. Jennifer, in some of her entries, expressed her own sentiments that seemed to foreshadow her unlikely demise.
Hmm.
So, June later described her stay in Broadmoor in this way, and it's in quotations, so it should be her direct quote. We got 12 years of hell because we didn't speak. We had to work hard to get out. We went to the doctor. We said, "Look, you wanted us to talk. We're talking now." He said, "You're not getting out of here. You're going to be here for 30 years." We lost hope, really. I wrote a letter to the Home Office. I wrote a letter to the Queen asking her to pardon us, to get us out. But we were trapped. But finally, in March of 1993, arrangements were made for the twins to be moved to a lower security clinic in Wells.
All right.
Before their transfer, they were visited and interviewed by a journalist. During which interview, while drinking tea, Jennifer calmly stated she had decided to die so that June could live a normal life.
Oh.
I know, that's really sad. It's gonna get really sad for the next little bit. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Upon arriving at the new facility, doctors found Jennifer was unresponsive. She had seemed to have drifted off during the trip and wouldn't wake. After being taken to a nearby hospital, Jennifer Gibbons was pronounced dead due to a sudden inflammation of the heart. She was
Hmm.
just 29 years old.
That's definitely strange that she would develop a heart condition like that all of a sudden
Yeah.
at that age.
While Jennifer's untimely death was shocking, the effect that it had on her sister was shocking as well. June suddenly began to speak to literally everyone, as if she'd been doing so her whole entire life. She was released from the hospital shortly after, and by all accounts, began to live a fairly normal life from that point on.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's what I had
definitely
gathered.
very interesting.
I know. The Pollock twins was the first one I had heard of, and I was like, well, this isn't enough. And then I was like, you know what? We'll do a short one, like a short little bit on Silent Twins. I can promise you guys, if you want to know more, there's probably a ton more articles you could read. There are also a lot of podcasts that talk about the Silent Twins. When I searched it earlier to see how many podcasts, there's a bunch that have 2 or 3 parts. So they probably go into way more detail than what I did. I wanted to keep it short and sweet so we could pair it with something else. I like to pair things. Plus, to me, what was really interesting was the stuff that I did bring up about both cases. Over here, we don't get crazy into detail, not all the time anyway. So,
Yeah.
Echo, do you have anything you want to add this podcast?
I don't think so, but I hope you guys are ready for my next episode.
So, we were really excited this week because we got to join a community with a bunch of other podcasters. And so, hopefully, soon, maybe have some guests on, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, that should be very exciting.
We've also reached out to one of our friends who may or may not be able to come on.
I hope she can.
I hope she can too. We are working out details to come up with a very fun Christmas theme. Or I guess we should say we're hopefully going to make December full of Christmas themed.
Yeah.
Different Christmas themed stuff, winter themed stuff. You might be getting some more history lessons from me in December. I'm not going to tell you what, but it'd be a fun one.
It ought to be.
Oh, it ought to be. I hope that everyone is doing okay. I, for one, have had an ear infection. If for some reason we go back into quarantine, don't worry. Me and Echo will probably up maybe the amount of episodes we put out, I think is the hope.
We probably would be able to, especially if the daycare gets shut down.
Yeah.
I'm kind of assuming that it won't get shut down this time unless the state orders it. I just keep hearing over and over again that the school and the daycare are going to try to remain open as long as possible.
So, if you would like to email us or send us some stories or request some episodes, I'm going to tell you how to do so now. Does that sound exciting?
It sounds exciting to me.
Sounds exciting to you. There's some different things I want you to do if you're going to do so. You can send an email requesting a story or sending us your story. If you are going to send us a story that you don't mind us sharing on the podcast, you can do so at swustories@hotmail.com. And in the subject tag, we're going to need you to put story. Now, if you want to send us an idea for an episode that you would like to hear in the future, you can also do so at swustories@hotmail.com. But in the subject bar, we want you to put recommendation. That way, when me and Echo are going the email, we know what goes to what folder.
Yeah.
It'll help us organize. It'll help us a lot. If you are not following us on whatever podcast listening service you are using right now, we would love for you to go ahead and follow. If you'd like to leave a review, we would love to hear your opinions because we still haven't had a review at all.
We could definitely use some feedback, guys.
Yeah, we definitely could. We know we're all over the place. We hopefully have been getting better. We want to know that people are enjoying it. I'm hoping people are enjoying it. We also have a Twitter, and it is at StrangeWeirdUN1. It should also have our logo and our podcast name on it. You can leave us stuff there. We will see it, I promise.
Yeah.
We hope we've kept you entertained this time. We hope that you enjoyed it. And we want you to come back for some more strange, weird,
and unforgettable conversations.
So we're going to see you next time, okay? Bye.
Bye.